In this video, we'll discuss the features on Pierre Poilievre's face that point to endurance in the political sphere, as well as a marker for potential misuse of life force. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another face reading. So, I am on site in Nevada City for a weekend with my daughter. We're staying in a yurt here, camping in the woods. They've got a wood-fired stove. They've got outdoor showers. There's fire pits. It's really cool. You can actually see the fire pit behind us. So, I'm here on site filming this. Hopefully there's not too much ambient sound. There is a creek right down here, but I'll try to do my best to cut that out in post-editing stuff. So for today, who we have is Pierre Poilievre. His last name is French. It's very difficult to pronounce, but I saw an interview where he said the easiest way for the general person is to say Poilievre, so he's good with that, so am I. He is the leader of He's a Canadian politician, but he's the leader of the Conservative Party. So this is a political figure. And the thing I always say for everyone is, especially nowadays, when we read political people, if you're reading a political person, it's very easy for our biases to come in. And face reading is really predicated on being neutral, a balance of yin and yang. And so I don't want you to get too hung up on political things and who they are. You have to read features as they are and realize that these people in the left-leaning sphere or the right-leaning sphere have their place. That's yin-yang theory. Oppositional forces working together, and do your best not to hate others. You can disagree, you're going to have your things, but the thing is, don't get too hung up on this. You've got to read things neutral to be fair. So, that being said, I have seen some of his interviews, very articulate guy, pretty smart. He and Justin Trudeau get into it. They really argue a lot, and it's pretty funny actually watching them I think it's the Canadian Parliament or the equivalent. Don't quote me on that, but whatever the title is for that, but them going at it is pretty funny for what it's worth. So the key things that I want to talk about are his earth-dominant features, his forehead lines, and he does have a Jing leakage marker that I want to talk about, which is that line that shows up here right along the center line. So when I was looking at his face, the thing that kind of came to the front lines was the reading of J.D. Vance. These are two conservative politicians who have fleshy, earthy features. So when people are watching my videos, they're like, what does fleshy mean? We all have flesh on our face. It means plump. It means supple. So if you look at him, there's something kind of squishy about his face. Full cheeks, full nose, rounded edges. Everything is kind of plump. And his body, when you look at him in interviews, he's not carrying a lot of extra body fat. So this is what they would call true earth. Any person who puts on extra body weight is going to get surplus of earth, which is not favorable in the big picture in terms of health and longevity. We don't want to have our body fat be too high. It leads to a lot of diseases, heart disease, inflammation, diabetes. So he has what they call true earth, lean body and a full face. So that being said, some similarities between J.D. Vance and Pierre. Now, when I was looking at his forehead, this is what kind of leapt out to me outside of his plump earth features. He has the connected forehead lines, which is what I call the storyteller lines. These lines are associated with persuasion, the person's ability to articulate ideas well, for one. They can have congruency in thought and link ideas, usually and verbally, are pretty good. So that's one, okay? That's favorable in terms of politics because the political sphere is really about talking about issues, advocating for issues, and really promoting certain ideas. And if you want your ideas to land, you're going to have to be persuasive. So these kinds of lines in the political sphere are good. They're helpful. Now, he's also got kind of these two disconnected lines right here, which is interesting because what separates that is the flying dagger, okay? So for review, this central line of the face that goes from the top of the hairline down to the center of the chin is called the river of life. This line, having wrinkles along this center line, is something to pay attention to. When the lines are horizontal, it's sort of like, not as bad, but when we see a vertical one, we really want to assess the life terrain. Now, if we're looking at a politician, whether he was leaning left or right, people will see this line, and if you're biased against a conservative political figure, you're going to say, well, because he's conservative and I disagree with his ideas, he's obviously misusing his life force, therefore that line shows up. You can't think of it like that. Because he's conservative, you can't say, well, that's where the bad leakage is coming from. Totally wrong. And it's very easy to fall into that trap. Again, and if you were the opposite and looking at a liberal political figure saying the same thing, no dice, can't do that. What I would be saying to him, excuse me, is this line shows up in the forehead area. So the mental sphere, you want to think in big, broad terms in face reading first. Start big and then work small. The geography of the forehead relates to the mind, the mental sphere, the mental capacity. So he has these connected forehead lines, which means the mind is also congruent in its thought and how he articulates. But then he's got this disconnected line with that flying dagger, an obstacle or an island in the river of life that energy has to go around. So I would be probing into like what goes on mentally. Are there things that you struggle with mentally in terms of what you're showing the external world as a political figure, and then also what you're dealing with behind closed doors? And that's the thing to remember about politics. This is a very dicey game. I would love to say that people shouldn't play politics, but it's like sometimes, I'm sure, in the political sphere, we have to do this thing. We also have to say it a certain way so the public can get behind it. And maybe it's not totally 100% the truth, but for the greater good, at least in their mind, this is what we have to say so it can be digestible. There is conflict usually in politics on both sides. Both people, if they have both sides of, people on either side of the party are going to have conflict usually with what they're telling the public and what they're actually having to do. And that is the nature of politics. So with Earth features, when we see this plumpness, I have to bring you back to the 5-element wheel. So the modern rendition is the 5-element wheel, the circle, fire, earth, metal, water, and wood. That's the modern day representation because it's usually easier to understand the creation and destruction cycles of the elements when it's presented this way. However, classically, earth sits at the center of the 5-element wheel. And the reason for that is the earth was very important because all of the elements are birthed from earth. All of the elements come from that. So having a dominance in earth, what that means is when you have fleshy features, you also have command of the 4 elements usually pretty well. You can kind of rotate through them because you sit at the center. Now, you put that power into a person that is good-natured, that's great. You put it into a person who's bad-natured, not so great. So again, it really depends on the heart and soul of the person in terms of these dynamics. But earth relates to endurance. So when we think about the wood element also has relation to endurance, but typically where that kind of falls into play is usually like sex drive. When someone has strong wood features, that's more about lasting power in bed, right? Quote unquote, good lovers who can go a long time. That's more about the wood energy. But when we see fleshy features, that means endurance, sort of like a workhorse that can pull heavy things for a very long time. And that's good. Again, this is favorable for politics because politics are gnarly. Like I wouldn't want to be in politics. To play that game and to navigate the political sphere is very hard. But again, if you have these features in politics, it's good. But he reminds me of J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is also a conservative guy who's got those fleshy features, which means this person is probably going to put in some work and they're going to be working hard within their political context. Now, the other thing is he's got kind of squinty eyes. So when we see the squinty eyes, the smaller eyes, usually, the baseline is smaller eyes is introverted, and then bigger eyes is a bit more extroverted. However, he's obviously in a political position, doesn't mind being in the public eye. So when we see the smaller eyes like this and they're kind of squinty, this also relates to external discernment and being critical of the external world first before reflecting inward. This isn't good or bad. It's like you have to look at someone like this and say that's his natural order. Donald Trump also has these eyes, kind of squinty. So does J.D. Vance, a little more squinty. And usually the advisement in face reading is your first order of thinking in things is to look at the external world, look at the external terrain, and yes, be critical and discerning there first. And if you do that, in most instances, the better position for you is to do that and then to reflect inwards. Now, someone like me, slightly bigger eyes, my method for discernment is usually like, what's going on inside first? Do me, right? Look at the stuff, what's going on, how do I feel about it, how am I processing it, how do I think about it, and then externally go to the second gear. So we're all built differently, but for him, I would say this is the thing to pay attention to. Now, his natural face, public persona, and inner persona, I try to get stoic faces that aren't smiling, but this is the only one I could find that was fully frontal. And what you'll notice is his public persona is a bit wider. So his inner persona is a bit narrower. In politics, again, this is favorable for him because when there's a little more width, that means the public image is a bit more broad and open and usually received better. And then the inner persona is a little tighter, a little more critical with those eyes that sit closer together, which is criticality. So with squinty eyes, the interpersonal nature, and closer set on the interpersonal nature, he's got a critical eye, I would say, and he has to use that to be happy and to feel like he's functioning well. So, these are kind of the big things that I would be thinking about with him. But again, I would be assessing and really asking about his mental terrain and that flying dagger, and just start probing and not judging, but saying there's probably a misuse of life force somewhere. Let's talk about it. Not judging politics, just saying, what are you doing? What are you having to navigate? And what might be taking energy from you? Because again, this line is not super favorable. So in any case, that's all I've got for Pierre Poilievre. If you've got questions, please put them down below. Thanks a bunch.